Peterson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Monday edition here, A Point of View, and hope you had a wonderful weekend. But if you happen to be listening to us on Friday, you might remember one of the calls came in from Kelly, and she was concerned about her daughter who will be graduating from high school. And as I think almost every parent expresses, if they leave high school and they go on to college, what's going to happen there? Going to be sitting in an evolution class and wondering whether or not to believe whether or not there's a God, sitting in a philosophy class and wondering if these arguments for atheism are more compelling, sitting in a social science class and hearing arguments for critical race theory or for gender studies or a variety of others, and we wonder, how can we possibly prepare our kids for what they will be experiencing if they go off to the university, or even if they just go and start a business or go into the military? What's going to happen? And so one of the things I shared with her is today we were going to be talking about the Mind Games Camp, and we have done this every single year. And this is, I think, very encouraging because even last year, in the midst of the COVID pandemic and all the rest, we were able to pull off a small one. But now we're going to have one that I think you will certainly want to know more about. So first of all, if you're a parent or a grandparent, you have a young person that is going to graduate this year, the next year, or sometime soon, or maybe you know somebody. This could be a niece or a nephew, could be somebody down the street that would want to know about that. I really want you to kind of pay attention. And in addition to talking about the Mind Games Camp, one of the things we're also going to do is talk about this new book coming out, The Return to the God Hypothesis. The book's not out yet, but Dr. Ray Bohlin, who's with us, he's a member and actually a fellow with the Discovery Institute, so he's already read the book. And that will be a chance to get a preview of that. Of course, I've also done a commentary on it. We've talked a little bit about it, so there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to cover. But first of all, let me go around the round table. You probably, if you've been listening to Point of View, are certainly familiar with Dr. Ray Bohlin, an individual with his PhD in molecular biology, a research fellow for the Discovery Institute, vice president of Vision Outreach with Pro Ministries, and it is always great to have you in studio.
Glad to be back, Kirby. Thank you.
And I think you can educate us about a lot of these issues, so we're looking forward to that. Sue Bohlin, of course, is married to him as well, and she is the web mistress, so we say. She's the writer. You've heard her, if you are a woman, at one of the MOPS events or a variety of other things, and also just an incredible calligrapher, and she's in studio with us today. So, Sue.
So glad to be here, Kirby.
Mind
Thank you.
Games Camp. Last year, we weren't sure we'd be able to do that, and you figured out a way to do that. Can you give us a little backstory? Because this year it's going to be the fully fledged one, but last year we had a lot of limitations, didn't we?
Oh, my goodness. We were so grateful that the Camp Copus in Denton, Texas, which is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we were so grateful that they opened up to us. We were the only organization with anybody on the campus at the camp.
Well, at the
that
beginning
week.
of the month, Governor Abbott allowed camps to open.
That's
And
right.
so
That's
Copus
right. We
could
were
be
down
open.
to the wire.
Yeah.
I
3 weeks
forgot
beforehand.
about that part. Have slept so many times since then. But we were able to go ahead and have the camp. And it was, I think there were about 16 students plus, the probe staff. And it was a joy to have them there. I don't think in the over 20-year history of Mind Games, anybody has ever appreciated being with each other as much as 2020, because the kids had been, cooped up in their homes since March, and suddenly this was June, and they were face to face with people, and it was amazing. So we took people's temperatures first thing in the morning and asked every day, how are you feeling? Asked the COVID questions, but we didn't have masks. No one came sick. No one got sick. No one got sick afterwards. It was great. And so we're going to keep doing the same thing. I'm so grateful that we get to do Mind Games again.
And I might just mention that the camp was open, but they didn't have the cooks or anything, so you had to go find cooks, too.
Yeah, there was that. Yeah. So
Weren't
all
enough
of
of
a
us to open
sudden,
the cafeteria.
oh, man, the Lord was so gracious to provide 2 retired ladies, dear, sweet angel ladies from our church, who were willing to come and cook 3 meals a day for a whole week. And the kids who, they've had camp food before went, oh, my word, this is amazing. These sweet ladies wore themselves out and probably lost 5 or 10 years of their life from how hard it was. But we're very grateful that things are back to normal this year.
I might just mention that if you would like to know some more, you can go to probe.org and find it. But we also have it right here at pointofview.net. Just scroll down. It says Mind Games. You pop it up. There's a video from last year, so it gives you a little bit of an idea of what it was like. But Mind Games 2021 will be full-fledged, right? And
we hope so.
And you will have the camp facility and the camp directors and all the kinds of things that are necessary. And so, Ray, give us a little bit of an idea of kind of the overview, because people wonder, well, is it always in the classroom or is it always studying? You do a lot of different things, from presentations, role play, but there's also time for kids to actually absorb everything they've had a chance to learn.
Yeah, well, we do a lot of different things during each day, actually. Each morning and evening is opened up with about a 10, 15-minute worship time, and we have a couple of probe staff who lead that. Yeah, there is a lecture. You're not going to be able to avoid that. But we don't have any readings for them to do. There's not enough time to put something like that in there. We do also have a small group discussion late in the afternoon before dinner. Students get a chance to throw out some questions or get to quiz some of them. How you doing with some of this stuff? And then towards the end of the week, we watch a couple of films.
Yes.
And Sue likes to call it a 1-week immersion in worldview and apologetics. So we begin it with worldview instruction, and then we start moving into the existence of God, the reliability of the Bible, and deity of Christ, and then we start branching out into cultural questions and issues.
You know, and Sue, one of the things about this is some people say, well, I'm familiar with some other programs around the country, and I've certainly given it visibility as well, but this one is really close and personal, because you aren't lecturing and then leaving. They actually get to sit at the same tables with you, and they get a lot of private instruction, and they get the very tough questions answered, don't they?
Absolutely. The thing is, it's always been on the smaller side. I mean, with a max of 40, as opposed to, for example, at Summit, that'd be 250 students, in a session. Everybody gets to know each other, and they get to know us as the staff. We have all of our meals with the students. We're not off jetting to our next speaking engagement or whatever. We're with them all week, which is great. Yeah. So, I mean, it is a very personal and intimate time. I'm still in contact with a number of Mind Games alumni who are now married and having their third and fourth kid, and they're still in touch with each other. These are some amazing relationships that form over the course of this week.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk a bit more about what happens each day, what are some of the course material, and all the rest. But this would be a perfect time as we go to a break for you to go to pointofview.net or even to probe.org, either way, to find the Mind Games Camp, and that takes place June 13th to the 19th. And also, one of the things we've decided is to provide a discount if you say that you heard about this on Point of View. So there's an application there. You can register online. There's scholarships available, too, to find out about that. We'll talk about the daily schedule and much more, but go to pointofview.net. You can find out all sorts of things about the Mind Games Camp. And if you know a young person that needs to go, you might get that information, pass it on. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Crime is dramatically increasing in cities where police department funding has been reduced. That shouldn't come as a big surprise and is well documented in a commentary that violent crimes spike in cities that defunded the police. More than 20 major cities have slashed their police budgets. Let's look at a few examples. Murders in Portland tripled from July 2020 to February 2021. This took place after city commissioners voted to cut nearly $16 million from the police budget in response to complaints about police force and racial injustice. Homicide rates in Oakland, California spiked dramatically after city leaders set as their goal to cut the police budget in half. For example, homicide rose 314% compared to the same time last year, while firearm assaults rose by 113%. In New York City, the city council slashed $1 billion from the police budget last summer. They already had seen 76 murders this year and 220 reported shootings. Minneapolis has been in the news, of course, ever since George Floyd died in police custody. The city council decided to divert more than $1 million from the police department budget to the Office of Violence Prevention and another $8 million to violence prevention programs. Chicago has also seen a surge in gun crimes after the Cook County Board of Commissioners voted to redirect money from arresting people and locking them up to housing, health care, and job creation. Homicides were up 33% in the first 3 months of this year compared to last year. You know, none of these sobering statistics should come as a surprise. Months ago, I predicted that there would be a crime spike in cities that cut law enforcement budgets. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Racism, go to viewpoints.info/racism. That's viewpoints.info/racism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Spending some time today talking about the Mind Games Camp. A little bit later, we're going to be talking about the return of the God hypothesis. So we'll be talking about that with Dr. Ray Bohlin, Sue Bohlin in studio as well. And we have information on our website, and you can find out more about the Mind Games Camp. It takes place from June 13th to the 19th. Sue, can you give us an overview of kind of what a week looks like? What are some of the topics that get into?
Well, we start with a basic laying down a foundation of worldview in terms of understanding the great big picture of how do we understand life. And then on top of that is our classical apologetics. The whole point is to give confidence that Christianity is true. So we help them understand the evidence for the existence of God, why the Bible is the Word of God, and why we can know that Jesus is God and the only way. And then after that, we start jumping off into cultural apologetics. How does all the Bible stuff that we've just covered apply to other topics? So we've got some creation, evolution, intelligent design stuff that Ray does. One of my favorite things to cover is grace and truth and LGBT, giving them perspective on that. They really need, every year that becomes more and more important.
Right.
Probably one of the most memorable parts of the week is addressing the biggest question that everybody has, which is, why would a good God allow evil, suffering, and pain? Mm-hmm. Ray covers the philosophical aspects of that, and then the very next session I do is very practical about the value of suffering, which is very personal and practical. I'm a polio survivor. I've lived with a disability my entire life. I know something about suffering. And I also have seen God redeem it and use it and bring glory to himself through it. And so that back-to-back aspect is very helpful. We also teach them how to watch a movie. We plant really good questions in their mind because we want them to stop mindlessly consuming entertainment like popcorn. Mm-hmm. Not a good plan. We close with a campus Christianity talk about how do you do life on a college campus or on the other side of having graduated from high school, so that you maintain your relationship with God and with other people, and basically keep walking forward in your Christian life. So we've got about 21 different sessions throughout the whole week. And so we fill their minds, but we also have lots of free time for them to process or sleep or just hang out with people or swim.
Yeah.
That's right. Play basketball.
Hike. Yeah, all things.
Yep, that's right. The camp is surrounded on three sides by a lake. It's absolutely gorgeous, and it feels like you're a million miles away from everybody. So it's super restful. So there's a real good balance of free time and then structured teaching time and talking time. And we think we've hit the sweet spot on that.
Dr. Ray Bohlin, let me come to you for just a minute, because it starts out with this professor who shows up and immediately, I think, creates a sense of need on the part of the students, right?
Well, the need comes after there's a little bit of tension. Usually whatever I'm wearing, I'll either take something like a shirt I'm wearing on top of a T-shirt, I'll just take that off, or I'll put something else on, and I'm changing roles just so they can see that. And I just tell them I'm a college professor doing research on the religious beliefs of young people, and I just have a few questions I'd like to ask you. Everybody here a Christian? I always ask specifically, but... let's pick somebody else. You're a Christian, right? Yeah. Why? I get this deer in the headlights look usually.
Yes.
Well, I asked. I guess I asked Jesus in my heart, and he. Wait a minute. What's Jesus doing in there with all the blood? That's just gross. What do you mean you asked him into your heart? And that kind of confuses them. Well, I trusted Jesus as my Savior. Oh, why'd you do that? Well, you made a decision, right? Yeah. Well, why did you make that decision? It doesn't take long. If they mention the Bible, the Bible, you believe the Bible. Why? So just that simple question sometimes, why? They've never heard that before. And it's meant to simply indicate to some who might not have thought they really needed to be here, that they really do. And it creates that sense of need that I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. Can't answer that simple question.
And I've seen you do this before when you've done it in a church, where sometimes I have the kids up front and the parents in the back, and pretty soon the parents are not making eye contact with you.
Please don't call on me.
Because they don't know how to answer those questions.
No.
And so it really creates a sense of need almost instantaneously. Sue, people are going to probably call in with just any question they have. And again, you can do so, 1-800-351-1212. But let me, if I can, real quickly just ask the questions that may be on people's minds. Okay, we have listeners from Maine to Florida, from California to Alaska. If my son or daughter or grandson or granddaughter comes to an airport, whether it's Love Field or DFW, how do they get from there to the camp, and what kind of chauffeuring is taking place? What kind of oversight at the camp? Can you give them some perspective on that?
Great question. So we have probe staff people who will pick them up, and I always ask for pictures, headshots in advance, and then cell phone numbers so we have contact with them, and we'll give them information. Here's a picture of the person that's going to pick you up. This is the type of car you can expect, and then put them in contact with each other so that we've got our people picking them up at the airport, bringing them to the camp, and then taking them back on Saturday morning to catch their flight home. So they're not on their own. They're in good hands the entire time.
And then, of course, you have dorms and all sorts of other things, right?
Well, actually, we get the use of their very nice hotel.
Yeah, I guess it better to explain what that is.
We have almost the third floor to ourselves. And so, two guys or two girls to a room, sometimes three, depending upon what the situation is. And our meals are taken care of through the camp. There's spaces on that third floor, just kind of sit and congregate and hang around, chat. It ends up being a very comfortable environment. And we arrange the seats are in like a U shape. And we're kind of at the top of the open end of the U, and there's room for us to kind of walk around, which what the professor does. He'll walk right up in front of people, So.
And talk about the COVID issue, because this is nothing like it was a year ago, but some parents might, or grandparents might wonder, okay, what about that? So what will you be implementing there in June?
Oh, it's going to be real low key. I mean,
I'm
sure
sure depend on what the camp requires us to do.
Right, yeah. And I would not be surprised if we have to check their temperatures in the morning. I will say that Ray and I teach at a couple of different homeschool associations, and the entire year, not a soul has come in with a fever. And so I don't know if that's going to be required, but we will acknowledge whatever is required of us, but they won't be needing masks. That just has turned out
Probably always a good idea to pack
okay.
one anyway.
Yeah,
but,
that would be. Yeah,
well, they're
on the
going to
airplane.
need it in the airport and on and on the plane for sure. I mean, they won't be able to get very far without one when they're traveling in. So, I mean, anymore, you can't go anywhere without a mask because you don't know. I mean, when we came into this building, there was the sign, face covering is required to come into the building. So, be prepared for that.
Just before we take a break, let's talk about price, because it's less than $500, but you're giving a discount for anybody that's listening today that wants to put Point of View on the application, and they will get the same price, I think, that the alumni get. Is that right?
That's what we're doing. We're doing a very special Point of View discount. It's usually $495, which is an incredible bargain for a week at a great camp with amazing instruction. Other camps are 2 to 3 times that. So if you register and somewhere in there mention Point of View, you can choose the alumni price, which is $425. So that's a $70 discount, which is, since we're not making money on this, it's a big chunk of change.
Well, again, I just want to encourage people to find out a little bit more about that. If you have a comment or a question about that, let's open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. But I thought, since we have Dr. Ray Bohlin here, I thought we'd just spend a few minutes talking about this new book at Stephen Meyer. We know Dr. Stephen Meyer. He's been on the program a number of times with us, and Ray and I have known him since before he even went off to Cambridge, so we've known him for a long time. But it is something related to one of the articles I posted just the other day, 3 major scientific discoveries in the past century that point to God. And I'll give you a little bit of a preview of some of the kinds of things I suspect Dr. Ray Bohlin talks about on the Mind Games camp. One of the biggest issues I've noticed, Sue, is a lot of people have said to me, I don't want to send my son or daughter. I want to go to the camp. So we're going to give you a preview, and then we'll get back into some of the other details. But if you have any question about the camp, they will be here for the rest of this hour, and that number is 1-800-351-1212. Let's take a break. Ray and Sue Bohlin with us, the Mind Games camp, and we'll come back and talk about the God hypothesis right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/sign-up. pointofview.net/sign-up. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. I want to talk about the God hypothesis for just a minute, but before we do, let me just mention again, we have a link to the Mind Games Camp, and some of you might think, well, what age groups? And if you look on the website there, it says students 16 to 21, so that's part of it. We talked about the cost. Some of you might say, well, I want to get a better understanding of what the schedule is. We'll click on this one. It has, I guess, Sue, the 2020 daily schedule. Might be a little different this year, but
not by much.
But it gives you a pretty good idea of how you cover it, where the free time is and everything. If you'd like to see some pictures, that is the case. There are multiple videos that you can watch that will give you a pretty good idea. And I recognize that sometimes young people aren't as encouraged about this and enthusiastic as parents are or grandparents, but if they see some of the videos and some of the kids, maybe that will encourage them as well. So lots of issues. We'll come back to it in just a few minutes. But Dr. Ray Bohlin, I just didn't want to miss this opportunity because as a fellow of the Discovery Institute, you've got an advanced copy. I'm looking for mine to come someday soon.
Well, I pre-ordered.
And it is pretty nice. And so we will probably get Dr. Stephen Meyer on there, but it's called Return of the God Hypothesis, 3 Discoveries that Reveal the Mind Behind the Universe. Or this article, which we did post a couple of days ago, which Stephen Meyer wrote, 3 Major Scientific Discoveries in the Past Century That Point to God. You're a scientist, you're a Christian. I know when you go to Europe, you go to Belarus, places like that, they say a Christian and a scientist in the same body. They can't even get their head around that. But the reality is this is a very good time to be a Christian because of all the scientific discoveries, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And in a sense, this book is a bit of a departure for Steve and the Discovery Institute. Previously, as I'm often explaining, those within intelligent design, if they're asked who the designer is, they basically say, well, the science alone doesn't tell you that. And you have to bring in your theological, philosophical underpinnings, and you can come up with an answer. But now Steve's identifying the designer as the God of the Bible. And so the Return of the God hypothesis is about the idea that, first of all, science owes its beginning to the Christian worldview.
Yes.
16th, 17th century Europe, Western culture was alive with Roman Catholicism, the Protestant Reformation, and all those were involved in this. And but then you get to the 19th century and things start to dissipate, and Charles Darwin and Origin of Species, all those sorts of things, and the God hypothesis falls into great disfavor. And now, as he's pointing out, that first of all, that the universe had a beginning, the big discovery about the Big Bang and what that means, the extremely fine-tuned universe that we live in, fine-tuned for life, and then the incredible aspects of design in biological life, DNA, organisms, and how finely structured they are. Those are the 3 basic discoveries he's talking about.
Yes. You have an endorsement in the front of that book that we talked about off air, and I've always said we should keep the microphone on during the breaks because I learned some things. So share that with the audience, because this comes from an individual that, to put it mildly, probably couldn't sign the doctrinal statement of our churches, but nevertheless says some very nice things about this book.
Michael Denton is a former senior research fellow in biochemistry, and his comment was, the best, most lucid, comprehensive defense of the God hypothesis in print. No other publication comes close. A unique tour de force.
Wow.
That's somebody who's not necessarily a friend of the God hypothesis.
Yeah, but still, it says it's very good. Let's take each one of those real quickly. I don't want to overdo it because we'll give an hour to certainly Stephen Meyer. But the first one is this idea that when cosmologists found that the universe had a beginning, that kind of messed it up for the atheists who always wanted to say, well, if the universe has always been in existence, we don't need a God. But when you have the universe coming into being, then everybody asks, what happened 5 minutes before the Big Bang, right?
Yeah, it's the astronomical community was basically looking for an infinitely old universe. That's what they were expecting. But when they started discovering the expanding idea of the universe, galaxies getting farther and farther apart from each other, and then some other things using Einstein's equations, all sorts of things, you begin getting to that point where there had to be, when you run the clock backwards, everything gets really close. And there had to at least be a beginning to the expansion. And obviously that leads to the beginning of the universe. And that was really difficult. A book called God and the Astronomers came out in the 60s, just documenting how so many astronomers, cosmologists were really unhappy about the Big Bang.
And so that's the first one. The second one, I think a lot of listeners have heard this idea of fine-tuning. They've heard it like a Goldilocks universe.
Yeah,
Explain that.
Well, there are so many aspects to the universe that allow life to exist at all. They have to be very, very precisely put together, or in this particular form, the gravitational constant for the theory of gravity. It's incredible how, if it was just infinitesimally small, larger, or smaller, the universe wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
And so many other things are just like that, even in our own solar system, our distance from the sun, the fact we have oxygen, there's plenty of water. All these things come together and they start adding up to make the probability of such a universe extremely small.
And what I understand at the Mind Games camp is you actually have blow-up planets and things like that. So you get everybody involved to recognize that, again, if the Earth was just a little bit closer to the sun, a little bit further away from the sun, you wouldn't have life on this planet, right?
No. Get a little further away and we'd be iced over. You get a little too close and all the water would be water vapor.
Yes.
So,
well, those are the two. The one I wanted to camp on is, since you have a PhD in molecular biology, what he said is that molecular biology has shown that we have a digital code, and that digital code is so important. And then he even quotes, since he, of course, is up there in Seattle, from people like, those people that actually write those programs, for example, for Microsoft. Bill Gates says DNA is like a computer program, but far more advanced than any software we've ever created. So the more we get into the cell, the more we understand the genome, the more we understand some of these complex molecules. You've got to say it's really hard to make a case that all happened by chance, right?
Even in I teach an anatomy and physiology class, and one of the things I end up harping on, if you will, is that various sensing organs in your body are sensing things all the time. And they're keeping track of your calcium levels, keeping track of your glucose levels, keeping track of this. And if something goes slightly out of whack, well, there's a response that takes place and things go back to normal. But even when you look inside the cell, that's going on to an even greater degree and detail. And in some of these things, we still haven't figured out how in the world is that getting regulated. What's the sensing process? How does a motor protein know to take this big vesicle loaded with stuff from this place to that place?
Yes.
Where's the address?
Yeah.
They never misdeliver. They never gets to the wrong place. So the more we discover, the more intricate the detail is, the more layers there are, the hierarchy of control.
And so, again, just one of the things that's so intriguing is, if you think of it as a computer program, since I put myself through graduate school doing computer programs, I remember that if I just had one variable that wasn't defined, or one slash or asterisk that wasn't right, the entire program doesn't work. Well, that's sort of true with proteins and amino acids and things like that. True, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, we use the terms transcription and translation. We talk about how proteins are made. Well, DNA gets transcribed into RNA, and RNA gets translated into protein. Those are language terms.
Yes.
Not because they're convenient, because they accurately describe what's happening. You have different languages, and they get translated one to the other.
So again, this is all part of the God hypothesis. And Sue, that gives people a sense that even if you don't have a real scientific background, Ray Bohlin does it in such a way that you can really kind of understand some of the things that you won't hear in a evolutionary biology class, right?
Absolutely. Well, and what's really cool too is at Mind Games, I tell the students that if you have a science background, you're going to be blown away by the level of good stuff that Dr. Bohlin is offering. And if you are not a science person, you're going to be blown away by how big God is. Because this is going to be, if it's going, oh my word, I don't understand this, that's okay. God does, He invented this. And if it makes you worship we have succeeded. And so whether they get all the science or not, what they come away with is a far greater appreciation of how good our God is and how incredibly brilliant he is. And I love the level of science that they get at Mind Games, which is really kind of unusual for any other apologetics ministry.
And I think it's good, too, because the kids that aren't scientists get this, but then maybe you got the science geeks. They also get a chance to hear about the humanities and social sciences and how to think about that from a Christian point of view, so that if they take those electives, then they'll begin to have some questions. So we're going to come back after the break and talk a little bit about what a Mind Games camp looks like. And if you have some questions about registration, we'll talk about that. We just want to give you a little bit of a feel of the God hypothesis and the kind of things that are covered at the camp. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes in studio with us today, Dr. Ray Bohlin and Sue Bohlin. Sue, let me come to you for just a few minutes because, first of all, we've talked about science, but of course you have all sorts of other issues that you're addressing. But I understand that you have a box in the back of the room, and that provides students for something that oftentimes they've always wanted. They are allowed to ask a question that they would feel maybe uneasy asking their parents or even their youth leader about, right?
We have an anonymous question box. Instead of an Xbox, we call it the Ask Box. And I've decorated it with the Xbox logo on it and a slot in the top and some index cards and pens, and we invite them to ask any question they want anonymously. And we assure them, we're not watching you. We don't know your handwriting. You can ask anything you want, and we are not afraid of your questions. We're not really getting any questions that are new anymore. But it provides them with an opportunity to ask some of the questions that they've been wanting to ask but haven't either felt safe or didn't feel confident that their youth pastor or their parents or their teachers or whatever could answer. And so we've got such a breadth of understanding in terms of the various probe staff people who are there that somebody can answer it. Sometimes we need to do some research. We have internet access while we're there, but that's one of the things that we do throughout the week is we'll take some time, especially in the evening, and say, okay, so these 3-4 questions we're going to answer right now, and we divide them up. Who wants to address that, and somebody else may jump in and answer it. But it's a joy to be able to provide answers to questions that sometimes they've had for years.
And I found that sometimes you have some really bright students that say, the youth group was fine, but it was kind of fun in games. And the moment I ask a tough question, everybody kind of likes, well, you're not supposed to ask those questions, And Ray, that's part of the problem is that they are really challenged. I'm just thinking, Sue's dealing with gender issues, transgenderism, whether sexes and gender is socially constructed. You're dealing with some of these really tough science questions. And I would be unfair to even have a youth leader try to answer some of those questions.
Yeah. It gets into a lot of, you could say, it gets into the weeds. It can be pretty deep sometimes. And one of the things I like to mention to students and when I have a chance with parents is that every young person is going to have to go through a shift in their thinking. Primarily throughout most of their life, they're a believer because that's what mom and dad believe. That's what they've been brought up in. That's what their exposure has been. But there's going to have to come a time where it ceases to be what mom and dad believe and what I believe.
Yes.
And in order to get to that point, there's going to have to be some questions. There's going to have to, some doubts will arise. It's just natural. It's just how the human brain works. And you don't need to be afraid that your student's going to go through something like that. And that's what we are able to offer is a way to have those questions answered. And if they have doubts, fine. We've dealt with all of them before in one way or another. So it just provides an extremely healthy environment to have those sorts of doubts and almost necessary questions be answered.
So let's talk about the fact that it is face-to-face. And I understand that there's some other ministries that have done this for years, but it's all kind of virtual for them, isn't it?
My understanding is that Summit, which has their conferences in Colorado and California, well, those are both locked down, and so they can't have open, face-to-face, in-person conferences. So it's all via Zoom, which is it's so hard to do that. And so I love the fact that we are literally physically together in a room. People are just hanging out with each other, eating with each other, and there is a vitality that happens in person that you can't get any other way. And we've all got serious Zoom fatigue going on, and we're so tired of virtual, trying to mediate all of life through a screen. And so I love the fact that, we're in a room with young people. They are not on their phones. Yeah. They are engaged with us, and they're engaged with each other, and it is glorious, the connection, the heart connections that happen.
Let's talk about cost, but also I mentioned scholarship, and I don't think anybody's asked for one yet, but if there's a listener out there that's saying, well, this is going to be difficult, we just been through the pandemic and the lockdown and other things, you do have scholarship funds too, don't you?
We are so blessed by Interstate Batteries, who gives us money every year to accommodate students who need some scholarship assistance, particularly those who are going to be flying in. Often, I might be able to handle the flight, but I couldn't handle the camp, So there's a scholarship application on probe.org on our website, and we would be delighted to welcome a student who, they can only pay a portion of it or even need a full scholarship.
So again, it is normally $495, which is still amazing because that's all the food and everything else. There's some recreation fees if you get enough people. There's ropes course and all that, but that depends on how many actually show up. But you're making that available for what you are charging for the alumni, which is $425. So that's a pretty good deal already. But then to get a scholarship and those kinds of things, what else do we need to know? There's Mind Games camper forms and a few other things are there. We did mention age, but they may be wondering, okay, what do I pack? What do I bring? What kind of release forms? Those kinds of things. That's all there on the website, isn't it?
It is. And as soon as someone registers, and let me just say again, this is for students 16 to 21, 22. As soon as they register, I email them the camper forms, although they can be downloaded off of our website as well. So, a welcome letter, what you should pack, what you should expect, release forms, that kind of thing. So I immediately respond with the camper form. So, yeah, we got that.
Let me just mention, too, that as we're just coming down to the end here, if you maybe have a child or grandchild that's of that age, great. But you probably, if you've been listening right now, know somebody that would like to know about that. So you can also take this and forward it on. And, Sue, if somebody didn't hear the whole interview or they're passing it on to somebody else, they can contact you, can't they, to get some more of the information? Because they may just wonder, what exactly are we talking about here?
If they go to probe.org/mindgames, my phone number and email address are there. I would be glad to talk to anybody. So, yeah, ask me.
She's always glad to talk to anybody.
I like it. I like people.
But again, June 13th to June 19th. This is in the Denton area, and it is Camp Copus. And if people want to see what the camp looks like, or they want to get a sense of what it's like, there are just all sorts of videos. First of all, you have a video of the Mind Games Camp 2020. Now, recognize that was last year, which is kind of small, but that still gives you an idea. Then you have some interviews with some of the students, and you can get a sense of what they have experienced. And you've had relationships with these students, you said, for years, that now are married, having children. So I've been in the business for a while. You kind of know what to do and how to prepare them, right?
It's a joy because this is what matters for eternity. It's not just time, it's eternity. And I'm so grateful to be a part of equipping them to do life to the glory of God.
Well, looking forward to it. Ray and Sue, thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
And thank you for giving us a preview of the return of the God hypothesis. Another one of those thick Stephen Meyer books you don't get through right away. But
he doesn't write short books.
Yeah, but Ray Bohlin has been with us. Sue Bohlin has been with us. And again, you can go to probe.org, or of course we have a link at pointofview.net. And just simply scroll down. You'll have the picture both of Ray and Sue Bohlin and the one that says Mind Games Camp 2021. And we encourage you to find out a little bit more. So those of you that have young people that are heading off into the world, whether to college or the military or maybe into the workaday world, you want to prepare them, and we wanted you to know about that here on Point of View. We come back, we're going to get into all sorts of issues in the news. The president has given us a lot to talk about, and we'll talk about that right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Miss Sarah, let's get back into some of the issues in the news. And also, as a program note, let me just mention that tomorrow, in our first hour, we're going to have Colonel Alan West in studio with us. He, of course, is an individual that has served in the military, served in Congress, as actually the head of the Hope Center, but also is the head of the Texas Republican Party. So we're going to get into some of the political issues from his perspective, and certainly welcome your phone calls. But let me just mention that this hour, we're going to get into all sorts of things already happening around us. First article, which is entitled Biden's Stalled Revolution. It comes from Ramesh Ponnuru. We'll get to that in just a minute. Have one by our good friend Frank Wright, Dr. Frank Wright, The Culture of Death and How We Need to Stand for Life in a Culture of Death. One by Jonathan Turley. It's amazing how many times we find ourselves actually calling upon him in one way or another. He is a professor of law at George Washington Law School, but nevertheless has pointed out that some of the things that have been happening, certainly by Maxine Waters, are of great concern, and actually makes the case that Maxine Waters could be just a perfect person to testify in the court case that she brought against Donald Trump, saying he was inciting violence, when I think it's pretty obvious this weekend she was inciting violence. So we'll get into that. And then also one that I thought we might be able to get to before the hour is up, the fact that there was a writer for Slate, which tends to be kind of a left-wing progressive group, nevertheless saying that, maybe it's time to end outdoor mask wearing. And the whole woke mob came crashing down on that individual as well. So if nothing else, we'll talk about some of those issues in just a minute. But I thought part of this fits into the fact that if you have not been paying too much attention, and I'm sure most of you are because you're listening to Point of View, everything is coming fast and furious. And I was just thinking about the fact that, back in 1970, there was a book by Alvin Toffler called Future Shock, in which he said the change that's going to be taking place in the 1970s and even 1980s is going to be so fast and furious, people are going to have trouble putting their heads around it. Well, if they thought the change in the 70s and 80s was significant, look at all the changes taking place right now by just the president himself, not to mention all the changes in terms of the economy, all the social and cultural changes, and all the rest. And people are just getting worn out, and everything is coming fast and furious. There was a book that came out in the end of 1980s that was by an individual that wrote about megatrends. That came out in 1988. John Nesbitt. But nevertheless, we are seeing just a remarkable number of things happening simultaneously. And just in the political world, I thought it was interesting because the other day, Mike Allen, writing for Axios, said that we have 3 blinking lights for the Biden administration. One of those is Russia is menacing the borders of Ukraine. Another one is China is sending increasingly ominous signals over Taiwan. And then you have, of course, the Iranian mullahs who are engaged in uranium enrichment. Well, not to be outdone, Jim Garrity said, well, it's not 3 blinking lights, it's a wall of blinking lights, because you can add to that the border. We've talked about that. We certainly can talk about the issue of inflation, which even if we don't have inflation, and I think we will, we certainly will have dollar devaluation. The whole issue of law enforcement and policing, of course, the case taking place right now in Minneapolis. He also goes on to talk about issues ranging from Hunter Biden and the impact that that will have on him personally, for example, as well as the whole issue of masks, the conversation I just had a minute ago about even suggesting that maybe we shouldn't wear a mask outside is controversial. And we are facing an enormous, if you will, just onslaught of ideas and issues. And so I hope you'll listen to Point of View every day, because we're going to do our best to try to sort some of this out. But the first article is what is entitled Biden's Stalled Revolution. And the argument that is being made by Ramesh Ponnuru is that even though there's a lot of hue and cry, there's a lot of noise, and maybe even some signal in the midst of that noise, the bottom line is that even though a lot of progressives are just thrilled about all the things Joe Biden is doing, when you get down to what has actually been done, maybe not so much. Because he talks about the fact that progressives, for example, on Slate, an online publication, which is basically left of center, to put it mildly, they were saying that the whole infrastructure bill leaves Reaganomics in the ash heap of history, and that what is happening now through not only Joe Biden, but through people in his administration, through Democrats controlling both the House and the Senate, have unleashed Democrats' legislative ambitions. And of course, on the other hand, Republicans have also been saying, this is moving the country in the wrong direction. And it's very obvious as you get to the next page, he's acknowledging that public policy has been moving left, but this idea that there's sort of this progressive juggernaut that he's saying maybe isn't true. He says, let's look at all the issues. For example, the idea of a ban on assault weapons, statehood for the District of Columbia, the expansion of the Supreme Court so that you would have court packing, limits on carbon emissions, a $15 minimum wage, a ban on state voter ID requirements, amnesty for illegal immigrants, and a variety of others, including the Equality Act. He points out that what these policies all have in common is, although they are thrilling the liberal progressives, they're not on track to become a law. Now, a lot of that could change if indeed the Senate begins to get rid of the filibuster. But right now, although there's a lot of talk about this, there's a lot of dust, there's a lot of noise, the reality is probably not as much being accomplished as you might think. And it's just sort of a reminder that when we start looking at these issues, many times there is a lot of concern, a lot of hue and cry, a fair amount of hype, even hyperbole. But again, unless you actually are able to break the filibuster, or if you all of a sudden could start convincing not only some of the Democrats, but a number of Republicans that, we really need 13 people on the Supreme Court rather than 9, there's going to be a lot of frustration come a year from now in which a lot of people felt that there would be a chance to really implement some of these things under a Biden-Harris administration, or what is starting to become a Harris-Biden administration. And that really didn't take place. So I posted this one if for no other reason than to remind you that even in the midst of some things that may be causing you some level of tension, some level of anxiety, some obvious concern about the future of this country, many of these political things have not taken place. By the way, he does also mention the fact that we've already spent $1.9 trillion on an American Rescue Plan. And by the way, if we spend another $2.3 trillion, it means that those dollars that are in your pocket probably aren't going to be worth as much next year. And the impact that that has on you, your children, your grandchildren, the housing market, stock market, and much more are of concern. So I'm not minimizing it, but I just wanted you to hear from somebody who says maybe this revolution that everybody's talking about, it's kind of stalled at the moment. We'll come back and talk more about it right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Crime is dramatically increasing in cities where police department funding has been reduced. That shouldn't come as a big surprise and is well documented in a commentary that violent crime spike in cities that defunded the police. More than 20 major cities have slashed their police budgets. Let's look at a few examples. Murders in Portland tripled from July 2020 to February 2021. This took place after city commissioners voted to cut nearly $16 million from the police budget in response to complaints about police force and racial injustice. Homicide rates in Oakland, California spiked dramatically after city leaders set as their goal to cut the police budget in half. For example, homicide rose 314% compared to the same time last year, while firearm assaults rose by 113%. In New York City, the city council slashed $1 billion from the police budget last summer. They already had seen 76 murders this year and 220 reported shootings. Minneapolis has been in the news, of course, ever since George Floyd died in police custody. The city council decided to divert more than $1 million from the police department budget to the Office of Violence Prevention and another $8 million to violence prevention programs. Chicago has also seen a surge in gun crimes after the Cook County Board of Commissioners voted to redirect money from arresting people and locking them up to housing, health care, and job creation. Homicides were up 33% in the first 3 months of this year compared to last year. You know, none of these sobering statistics should come as a surprise. Months ago, I predicted that there would be a crime spike in cities that cut law enforcement budgets. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Racism, go to viewpoints.info/racism. That's viewpoints.info/racism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, you know, I know some of us are just saying, what kind of world do we find ourselves in? As you have right now the Minnesota State Police all standing guard, waiting for, of course, after the closing arguments and the trial there in Minneapolis, then whatever the verdict, fearful that riots, well, they'll call them protests, but there'll be riots will break out no matter what takes place. And it, again, is just a world in which we find ourselves with so many tensions and so many concerns. I wanted to come to my second article because this comes from our good friend, Dr. Frank Wright. It's Standing for Life in a Culture of Death. And it's a reminder that we are the light of the world. We are certainly called upon to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world, especially at any time, but especially when we find ourselves wanting to provide light in the midst of darkness. And it also brings us back to the need for us to speak truth when sometimes speaking truth is unfashionable, sometimes very strongly criticized. It comes back to, for example, the statement that is the title of the book by Rod Dreher, speak not by lies, live not by lies, that we should speak the truth. We should not live by lies, but we should live by truth. And it was just interesting, even as I was was thinking about that. Jim Garrity, when he was talking about Joe Biden facing red lights, he points out Mike Allen says there were 3 blinking red lights. And then he made a joke and said, well, actually, it's 4 lights. And if you're a Trekkie, you'll understand the joke. Okay, it takes a minute. But there is a scene where Captain Picard is being tortured by these aliens. And have you ever noticed how the aliens always look like they need a bottle of acne medicine? Well, this is one of those where he's got these real weird-looking things. But the whole time he's torturing the captain, he keeps asking him, how many lights are here? And there's 4 lights. And he says, 5. And he keeps trying to get the captain to say there are 5 lights. Well, there's only 4. And at the very end, after the torture sequence, he's taken out, he says there are 4 lights. And it's really just, if you will, an homage or a connection back to 1984, where, again, this individual's being tortured because he's being told you can't say 2 + 2 = 4. You have to say 2 + 2 = 5. And eventually he gives in and says that. And so whether it's 1984, whether it's Star Trek, and I know most of you aren't Trekkies, so you probably didn't get that joke there, or anything else, it's a reminder that we're going to have to speak the truth even when truth is unpopular. We're going to have to speak the truth even when there's pressure to tell lies. And we're going to have to stand up for light. But you know, when you provide light in the darkness, it makes you an easy target. And he talks about the fact, Dr. Frank Wright, of looking at the death clock. And at first it was to look at your own life expectancy, and that didn't go so well. But then he talks about another clock, and that is the fact that if we look at the number of abortions that have taken place since the infamous Roe versus Wade decision in 1973, that gets up to 62 million babies that are aborted. It's just hard to get your hands and your head around that in terms of it. He also points out that more than 18 million are African American babies, 30%. Yet blacks make up only 13% of the population. And so he says, thus the allegation of black genocide. But since abortion is voluntary, that allegation seems like a hyperbole. But he's pointing out that when you start looking down this issue, you can see that we are and have been living in a culture of death. And we've tried to bring on all sorts of pro-life people over the years to help you stand strong for life when there is so much pressure to push you towards the culture of death. And he goes on to say that in some respects, in a spiritual sense, we've lived in a culture of death ever since, of course, the fall, and we fell into sin and death. Scripture tells us that the God of this world, he says, Satan has blinded the minds of those who are perishing. That's 2 Corinthians 4:4, and that the whole world lies in the power of the evil one, 1 John 5:19, and that even Jesus himself refers to Satan as the father of lies and the murderer from the beginning, John 8:44. And that also we have an adversary, which Peter talks about in 1 Peter 5:8, who is a roaring lion seeking to devour. And so the point he's making is this is obviously a spiritual war that we find ourselves in. But it plays itself out in the culture and in politics. And he gives you a couple of quick examples, which I'll have before we take our break. He says one of those is Tyne Nyes. I'd say, okay, who is she? Well, she's a 38-year-old woman in Belgium. She was put to death, or he says, well, euthanized, to use the polite term, by the Belgium physician-assisted suicide apparatus. And you might say, okay, why did they put this individual who's 38 years of age, obviously in good health, why did they put her to death? She wasn't sick. She didn't have a terminal illness. She had Asperger's syndrome. Now, again, some of you may not be familiar with that, although we have talked about this before on the program. Asperger's is a kind of a form, I think it would be fair to say, of high-functioning autism. And it presents a wide range of characteristics. Sometimes they are somewhat awkward in social settings. due to speech challenges, sometimes language challenges, maybe due to sometimes having depression or anxiety. But if nothing else, oftentimes people with Asperger's have special abilities. Oftentimes they have high IQ. Sometimes they are able to work all sorts of mathematical problems well. Sometimes they have incredible focus or persistence, or sometimes they have incredible analytical ability. And so here in this kind of culture of death, now in Belgium, they just said, it's time to do away with an individual, not that has cancer, not that has, a terminal illness, not Huntington's chorea, not any kind of pneumonia or other kinds of issues, but instead simply because, after all, she's just not perfect, and we just don't need perfect people in our society any longer. And she was just one of more than 124 people, he says, that have been euthanized just because of what are called behavioral disorders. Then he goes on to talk about the Netherlands, and of course I've written about this quite a bit in my chapters on euthanasia and various books I've written over the years on Christian ethics. And he points out that 15 years after decriminalizing euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide, which is now, of course, decriminalized in many states in this country, more than 25%, that is 1/4 of all the deaths in the nation, are induced, rather than by an illness or other natural causes. In 2017, for example, 32,000 Dutch people died under what is called palliative sedation. In theory, these died while they were sedated in order to avoid physical discomfort. But again, there is what you have, as he calls it, a culture of death now on steroids. And so we hopefully are not moving into a future world like this in the United States, but we have found ourselves in this culture of death, starting with abortion, continuing through infanticide, now to euthanasia, being justified for almost any reason at all. And so if nothing else, he says, there's a little question that he says that the darkness may get darker. And the real question is, what do we do in a culture that is cloaked in the depths of darkness? And the answer is to shine the light of truth. For darkness is by definition the absence of light, he says. For those who are in Christ, we have been entrusted with the light of God's word, sharper than any two-edged sword. This is a time to stand for truth and defend the freedom of those most vulnerable in our midst. This is a time to stand for life in a culture of death. I need to get Dr. Frank right on again, but in the meantime, you have a chance to hear from him because it is the second article I've posted, and it's there because I just think it is going to be more and more important for us to speak truth to the culture. As we come to a break, let me just mention my Viewpoints commentary today is another place where we need to speak truth. You know what happens in the 20 different cities which have slashed their police budgets? I don't think this will surprise you. In those 20 different cities that have slashed their police budgets, what has happened? The crime has gone up. Now, again, there seems to be a complete absence of common sense anymore, even on the part of some of our elected officials. But hopefully you have enough common sense to recognize that the reason we have a crime spike in so many cities is because we've taken police off of the beats. We've taken police off of the streets. And if nothing else, it's just time for us once again to speak truth in a culture of lies and for us to actually stand for life in a culture of death. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover, and we will do so right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Back once again, let me just give you an opportunity to join the conversation today. 1-800-351-1212. We talked about this idea of being light in the midst of darkness and certainly standing for life and light in a culture of death. Let's, if nothing else, give you some positives, though, as well. The Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, for example, upheld the pro-life law from Ohio, and that actually protects unborn children with Down syndrome. It looks like the Sixth Circuit Court will also take up an appeal on Tennessee's informed consent law, so some of that is taking place. And right now there's trying to force a vote in the House on legislation that would protect babies that survived a botched abortion. That's something that the Republican whip Steve Scalise and some others are working on. So there are some very significant things happening in the pro-life area. And later this week, we're going to be talking about the fact that there really is hope in the midst of some very discouraging things as well. Yes, of course, we can talk about the Equality Act. We can talk about the For the People Act. And as I pointed out just a few minutes ago, we can see that there are a lot of people wanting to try to move policy to the left. But at the same time, you can look at some other things I'll be talking about later in the week. For example, 73% of Americans in the latest poll say they believe that the nation should be unified around the values of freedom, equality, and self-governance. That comes from a Rasmussen poll. Let's take one that was 2 years ago, and that's the Gallup poll, found that a majority of Americans identify either as conservative or moderate. And so even though we hear a lot from the leftist fringe and the woke mob, there's a place for us to be involved as well. So I did want to at least address some of those issues, and we'll, as we go through this week, get into that in more detail. But my commentary today, as I mentioned, has to do with the idea of a crime spike, and this comes from some material that was put together by a researcher who found that violent crime spikes in cities that defunded the police. What a surprise. And if you look at the 20 major cities that have slashed their police budget, you have very good documentation of that. And I give you, I think, 5 examples, and of course, that's just representative of others. Let's take, for example, Portland. Portland last night, I think they had to declare it a riot once again, a second time in 5 days up there in Portland. But if you look at the number of murders in Portland, Oregon, from July 2020 to February 2021, those have tripled in that period of time, in part because, quote, the city commissioners voted to cut nearly $16 million from the police budget in response to complaints about police and other kinds of things. If you go to California, let's take Oakland, California, for example, spiked dramatically after city leaders set as their goal to cut the police budget. Can you believe this? Cut the police budget in half. Homicide rose 314% compared to the same time last year. Firearm assaults, 113%. How about New York City? Oh, my goodness. They took $1 billion out of the police budget last year. They'd already, when this was written, had 76 murders and 220 reported shootings. And that was really back in March, so you can see where that's going. Of course, Minneapolis, everybody's looking at that right now. Of course, you have the trial, the George Floyd trial and all of that. The city actually diverted, I think it was $1 million from the Office of Violence Prevention, and then they moved another $8 million to another violence prevention program, and it got so bad that then the actual citizens were saying, we need police, so they have now sort of hired essentially kind of rent-a-cops for a while. And how about Chicago, which unfortunately is becoming kind of the crime capital of the country. This has seen a surge in gun crimes ever since Cook County Board of Commissioners voted to, quote, redirect money from arresting people and locking them up and instead spend that money on housing, health care, and job creation. As important as those things are, when you take police off the streets, guess what happens? bad guys do bad things, right? Of course they do. Homicides up 33% over the first 3 months of this year compared to last year, and that's just a part of it. I actually, and they use a particular commentary, sometimes give you a link to the original article so you can read all the rest, and it is disturbing. So that has to do with a crime surge. That is not helped when you have individuals who actually say things that inflame or incite different kind of reaction. And this comes from Jonathan Turley. Again, I find myself quoting sometimes from liberals who may not agree with us, but they're making the same kind of case that we would make, and I think because of that, they have a great deal of credibility. He's law professor at George Washington's Law School, and he said with rioting continuing in Brooklyn Center, then you have Representative Maxine Waters, who went to Minnesota and told the protesters that they got to stay in the street, they got to get more confrontational. And he said this statement is ironic since Maxine Waters is one of the House members suing former President Donald Trump and others for inciting violence on January 6th with the words that he actually spoke in the mall. He goes on to say that Maxine Waters insists that Donald Trump telling his supporters to go to the Capitol and make their voice heard and fight for their votes was actual criminal incitement. By the way, from a legal point of view, it was not. No matter whether you thought it was wise or not, that's not the point. But here, he's pointing out that Maxine Waters, speaking after multiple nights of rioting and looting, telling protesters to stay in the streets and get even more confrontational, now that kind of fits pretty much into the legal definition of incitement. And so she is now almost guaranteed, he's kind of joking about this, that she should be called as a witness if indeed this trial against former President Donald Trump actually goes forward, because she's the perfect example of it as well. Now, Jonathan Turley goes on to say that the words by Maxine Waters could well be cited in the ongoing litigation over the January 6th riot on Capitol Hill. He says, as I've discussed previously, the lawsuit by House members and the NAACP may prove a colossal mistake. It is one of the number of lawsuits, including one filed by Representative Eric Swalwell, remember him, that could ultimately vindicate Trump shortly before the next election. It's pretty obvious that Jonathan Turley does not want Donald Trump to run again 3 years from now, but we'll see where that goes. But Jonathan Turley goes on to say, while it is possible that members could find a trial judge to rule in their favor, these lawsuits would fail on appeal if they get that far. Moreover, they would fail under a lower standard of proof, that beyond a reasonable doubt standard in criminal law. Such a result would eviscerate the claim that Trump was guilty of criminal incitement in his speech. He goes on to say that after the riot, various legal experts proclaimed there was a strong, if not conclusive, case for criminal incitement. And he quotes some of those individuals, one from CNN, another one at the law school dean at the University of Connecticut, and all the rest. But he goes on in the next page to say, as I've previously written, these statements ignore both the elements of that crime and the controlling case law. Notably, while these and other experts insisted that the crime of incitement was obvious and public on January 6th, there had been no charge brought against Trump despite over 4 months. Why? The reason is that in an actual criminal case could lead to a rejection of not just the charge, but the basis for the second Trump impeachment, which I never really thought about. And he goes on to say that there are some various tests. We've talked about this before. The Brandenburg versus Ohio, probably the best known one on what incitement is. And if nothing else, he points out that other cases where they've tried to use the incitement case have not gone very well. But I love the way he puts it, because if nothing else, if you wanted to call an individual to actually testify on the defense side supporting Donald Trump, it would be Maxine Waters, in light of all the things she's been saying over the weekend. And this is where, again, you just have to, as a person with some level of discernment, say, okay, certainly what the president said on January 6th was not a good idea. It was a bad idea. Some people may have even thought that it incited a riot from just an emotional point of view. Of course, we've made very clear that there's a difference between the group that was at the Capitol and the group that heard him speak. But nevertheless, even if you buy that argument, it doesn't actually fit the legal standard, which I think for all sorts of reasons needs to be very high. Otherwise, you can sue people for just about anything they see, say, or encourage as incitement. But if you want to define, if you will, kind of a textbook case on what might actually constitute incitement, it would be what Representative Maxine Waters says. And you notice how the press hasn't covered it even half as much as it covered Donald Trump. I recognize she's a member of Congress. He was president. But, of course, there's some other reasons for that as well. And I think Jonathan Turley once again comes through by providing some common sense and some perspective, which seems to be missing right now in the media. Anyway, it's there for you on the website. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talking about the media, and our good friends at the Media Research Center said, okay, we had the first 100 days. Let's compare the first 100 days of Donald Trump and the first 100 days of Joe Biden. How did the major media, that'd be NBC, CBS, ABC, how did they cover that? 1,900 minutes of covering Donald Trump, and no surprise there, 89% negative, okay? By contrast, the press covered and these various news outlets covered Joe Biden much less. I think it was about 700 minutes, but also 59% positive. So, again, the numbers that put together by groups like Media Research Center counting all of that just gives you a different perspective on that. And, of course, no surprise that when you look at the current approval rating for Joe Biden, it's obviously much higher than it was for Donald Trump. It's almost as high as it was for Barack Obama, and yet they've had a chance, in many cases, to see a lot less of him because he's trotted out, gives a speech, leaves. And that is certainly the case. So if nothing else, just wanted to put that on the table there as well. And as we go through the week, we'll spend some time talking about some of this. Again, as a program note, tomorrow Colonel Alan West will be with us in studio for a while. We'll talk about some of the issues in the news, and would certainly welcome your phone calls and comments then. Last article I've posted here is just an illustration again of how even if you try to inject a little bit of common sense, if it goes against the woke ideology, the world will come crashing down on you. This has to do with Shannon Paulus. She is the senior editor of Slate. Again, this is left of center, right? Okay, we understand that. And as this particular article points out, Shannon stepped into a social media minefield on Saturday when she decided to actually address an issue that we've talked about on this program before. That is, if you're outside, is it even possible that you could contract the virus? I mean, after all, there is wind, there is sun. As a matter of fact, we now know that COVID-19 and with the virus actually is very easily destroyed by ultraviolet radiation, which would be, of course, sunlight. Also, the possibility of particles or droplets making their way from one individual to you, pretty small. Now, I recognize that some people are intimidated by that. I remember when I was in Oregon a year ago, I began to realize that I'm going to bring my mask with me, even as I was walking down this one trail through the woods to the beach, that if I saw someone coming with a mask, I would pull mine up just so that they wouldn't feel intimidated. Well, back when I was at the Botanic Gardens in Fort Worth, I did the same thing. Oftentimes, if you saw an Asian couple coming, they tend to wear a lot more masks, and I'm not going to pick a fight with them, but it's pretty ridiculous to even now, especially with so many people being vaccinated, to still talk about masks. So anyway, Shannon Paulus wrote this: "It's about time for us to stop wearing masks outside." And she uses all sorts of knowledge. First of all, what we now know about the risk of contracting and spreading COVID-19 diminishes, first of all, when you go outside. And there are all sorts of things about, and in which she actually said is, she was really calling for the fact that it's time to stop wearing masks all the time outside. Yeah, there could be times when you're talking to somebody outside, they're face to face. And then, if you want to read this, it goes on forever with all of the comments that come down on top of her. And you are having people that are just getting so upset with the possibility that this is dangerous. People saying, I can't believe that Slate approved this piece. She is a senior editor, by the way. It makes me rethinking reading other pieces there. Talk about a pretty bad take. Work from home journalist cries when he can't see people's smiles out on a walk, says mask wearing is exhausting. So, you had a few that were going the other direction, but most of them are like, I just can't even believe this is actually posted in this particular Slate site. And so, if nothing else, trying to give some argumentation, and it goes into it in some detail about the fact that the main message is that outdoors is a safe place to be. For example, he gave me a rough sense of how unlikely outdoor transmission is in the scenario where you're walking unmasked on a sidewalk or briefly past somebody. Of course, you see people wearing masks when they're bicycling and all of the rest. And so, at the very least, you would think people were saying, well, maybe you won't wear a mask, but I'm still going to. But here you instead just have people that are just incredulous that something like that would be written in the slate. And it illustrates to me that we are moving into what more and more people are calling the zero risk society. And I quoted from that the other day. I've got a commentary coming out next week on this as well. Andrew Mitra is actually the dean of the College of International and Security Studies at the George Marshall European Center for Security Studies. And one of his sentences, I think, kind of encapsulates it only so well. He says, a year of the COVID pandemic has transformed some of the freest and most affluent societies in the history of the West beyond recognition and in ways perhaps never imagined. And he is just talking about the fact, as you go through the article, how we have kind of almost this psychosis that is developed, which is keeping people now from just using what we would always consider to be kind of health care common sense, medical common sense. But that is not the case anymore because people are just actually fearful of even a virus, which, and you've heard the percentages, the 99+% actually survive it. And those people that do take a turn for the worse are usually those who maybe already have been vaccinated. But let's go on, in which I point out that you might even remember some of this conversation because about 2 years ago, we had Jonathan Haidt on. He was the co-author of the book, The Coddling of the American Mind, and he talks about 3 untruths, and one of those is the untruth of safety, what he calls the cult of safetyism, that the younger you are, the more that you are obsessed by safety. Of course, you wear bike helmets and all that, and I encourage people to be safe, but now they want to eliminate all threats. And so as a result, of course, Andrew Mitra points out the fact that this emphasis on safety, interestingly enough, really only focused on one factor, because he goes on to say, few politicians or media pundits bothered to ask the obvious question of why a life threatened by COVID deserve to be saved before all other lives threatened by, say, untreated cancers, untreated heart conditions, or why the rights of free citizens, such as the right to earn a living, to interact with one's family and friends, to educate one's children, or simply live in freedom, should be removed. And of course, we could add to that also the right to worship in your church. And so we've seen the impact of the pandemic and the lockdowns, the loss of small business, the impact that it's had on the GDP, the unraveling right now of our educational system, and of course the rise of all the social pathologies we talked about even last week: drugs, alcohol, suicide, domestic violence, and the rest. But anyway, I just thought we would end today by simply saying that even a person suggesting that maybe we shouldn't have to wear masks all the time outside was too much for too many individuals, and it illustrates again how we aren't even talking about medicine or health now. We're just talking about safetyism, which has begun to increase dramatically, and it's something we're going to have to deal with in the future. Well, tomorrow we'll have Colonel Alan West with us. We'll talk about all sorts of issues, and we'll welcome your phone calls. And if you would like to find out more, visit our website at pointofview.net. Thank you, Andrew and Steve. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
Sometimes I think about seeds. You ever stop to consider that some seeds become entire trees and some trees grow up and produce fruit? Other seeds become flowers or vines that bring us vegetables or berries. And some trees don't have fruit, but they're just pretty, especially in some parts of the country when it comes to the fall colors. Yeah, sometimes my mind goes off like that. And I also think about such things when it comes to the seeds that so many have planted in the quest to impact our nation through Point of View Radio. You may think that your gift is a small thing, but like a seed, it can grow to have an impact beyond your imagination. If you want to see beauty again in America, consider planting a seed today and making a difference by joining the Point of View Truth Team. Get the details today, right now, by visiting pointofview.net/team or call us at 1-800-347-5151. Plant a seed for a great future. Cultivate truth. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.